Hello and a warm welcome to HW News Network, your one stop show, truth be told, for some engaging and thought provoking conversations. Now, the Indian rupee plunged below the 87 level to an all time low of 87.29 per dollar on Monday, that is February the 3rd, as the dollar index surged more than a percent after the US President Donald Trump imposed tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China that triggered fears of a broad global trade war. Now, the rupee falling, obviously, the fingers have been pointed on what Modi government's policies have been. Is it because of the global failure? Or is it because of the failure of the Modi government? That's question number one. And what is going to be the impact of the trade war, which is triggered by Donald Trump? We'll discuss all of this. Joining me now is author, columnist, and former spokesperson of the Congress Party, Sanjay Jha, joins us this evening live with us on a very, very important subject, and I think something which is very, very close to Sanjay Jha's heart. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for joining this evening. And really wanted to know from you that the rupee falling, and we've heard often Nirmala Sitharaman saying that, there are a lot of extraneous factors, there are a lot of global factors, strengthening of the dollar because of which the rupee has weakened. What would you really say the reason why rupee has fallen to such a low level?
Firstly, Neelu, thank you very much for inviting me. I just first want to expose how disingenuous and hypocritical the BJP is. Go back to the times when I remember India was bracketed as the fragile five, when the entire emerging markets actually were bleeding, not just India, because of the US federal rate policy. And you find that at that point, the BJP and Mr. Modi, etc., called the government of Dr. Singh incompetent, corrupt, incapable of managing India's foreign exchange. They linked the foreign currency rate to nationalism and patriotic pride. And at that point, when Mr. Chidambaram or Dr. Singh and many of us as spokespersons of the party tried to explain the economic rationale behind the volatility and the external factors, they would tell us, stop making excuses. Here is the bottom line, Neelu. The bottom line is that the Indian economy is struggling, and you have seen a massive flight of foreign portfolio investors from India. They have actually been selling equity in the Indian stock markets. Also, don't forget that I think the Reserve Bank of India has been trying to salvage the rupee. And to that extent, you'll notice that India's foreign exchange reserves have actually come down substantially. Now, you can speculate what the number is. Some economists believe it could be as high as 200 billion, but even a conservative estimate will say anywhere between 50 to 75 billion, which is a lot of foreign exchange outgo. Now, here is the point, that even at these levels of the exchange rate, India's exporters have not been able to gain anything at all. And that should worry this government. The second point is that because the exchange rate has depleted, you are going to find that India is going to be importing inflation. One of the reasons why inflation is not likely to go down in a hurry. And I think Mr. Modi's government doesn't have a clue as to what to do. And I'll give you an example. Today, if you look at the tariff war, which President Trump has unleashed, frankly, already, with China, Mexico, and Canada facing a very high degree of tariff, this is going to be very, very disruptive. Now, a lot of people in India are probably going to hope that because India doesn't have a huge trade, surplus or a trade balance with America, Trump might ignore it. But knowing Donald Trump, he's unpredictable. He believes in the madman theory that, he's irrational, he's unstable. So that will create pressure on the others who might just kind of buckle under his intimidation and threat. That end of day, India might get away scot-free with Trump being more obsessed with other countries. But I think we should be deeply worried. And I'm concerned simply because if you look at even the budget, and I want to end by that before I take your next question, if you look at the budget announcement, There is a lot of hype over this 7 lakh going up to 12 lakhs. But you look at those with a
Yeah.
fine tooth comb, Nilu, and you'll find that is that going to be enough to trigger an economic revival? In that case, why didn't Nirmala Sitaraman do it 2 years ago? The truth is that India is facing a structural problem. And even if the relief is to be given, it should have been given to a lot of people who really need to spend that money, which is
Okay.
regular, which is
Yeah,
the poor.
sorry to interrupt you. You said that structurally things have gone wrong,
Yeah.
and somehow Nirmala Sitaraman, and for that matter, even Prime Minister Modi, have not been able to address those structural issues. Now, what are
Right.
the reasons, according to you? You are a banker yourself. You followed economy very, very closely. Why do you think that the Modi government has been so inept, so incapable, so inefficient in handling this economic crisis for the last 10 years, despite all big claims that we'll try and make India into a 5 trillion economy and we'll be the third largest economy and so on and so forth? So, what do you think are the reasons, according to you?
Well, the first thing is that ideologically and principally, this government has not understood that India cannot be adopting a model which maybe developed countries have done in the past and have failed in. To give you one example, in America, for a long time, they believed in what is called as supply side economics. To make it very simple, it is that you boost production, you help the corporate sector, you help manufacturing services, whatever, people who produce output and services. And when they produce, it will result in more jobs. And when people get more jobs, they'll get higher income. And because the companies will grow and the GDP will grow, the tax revenue will go up, and with that tax revenue, the government will spend on welfare, subsidy, and whatever services like defense, etc., etc. This is basically expecting that there will be a trickle down from the growth created by the private sector, who will get benefits of tax and several other incentives, and that will result in the welfare of those at the bottom of the pyramid. This, frankly, even America, which adopted it during the time of President Reagan, abandoned it, or at least they have recognized it's got serious shortfalls. India, if you go back to 2019, Neelu, let me remind the viewers of your very respected program. In 2019, Nirmala Sitaraman announced an annual tax outgo, which means the government's revenue was given to the corporate sector, of 1,45,000 crores a year, by bringing the tax rate down for the corporate sector down to 22%. And she said this will result in a boom in employment and private capital investment will increase. In the last 6 years, without compounding that number, Nilu, the government of India has foregone tax revenue to the tune of approximately 10 lakh crores. 10 lakh crores. You know what's the budget for Manrega? What is the budget for PM Kisan? 60,000. This is like 16 times that amount. Just think about it. So they followed this model when at that point the Congress and the opposition said, give this money to the poor, help the MSME sector, give purchasing power to the hands of Manrega, into the hands of farmers, into the hands of those who really are suffering below the poverty line. When they will spend, it will result in bigger growth, because people who have a lot of money are not going to be big spenders, because for them it doesn't make a difference. Let me give you one example, that a person who's earning around 50 lakhs, they're going to get a benefit in this budget announcement of Nirmala Sitaraman around a benefit of 1 lakh. You think a person with a 50 lakh annual salary is even going to count that 80,000 1 lakh saving? It doesn't make a difference to him or her at all. It makes a
Right,
difference to those who are in that 12 lakh category at max. But please don't forget that is just 2.2 crores overall.
right,
And the number of people who are now exempted from paying that tax or will get it as a rebate, they're getting it from 7 to 12. Up to 7, they were not paying anything anyway. So,
right.
what's your big spectacular change, but barring the headline? Nothing at all. Which brings me to what you asked me. So, where has the government gone wrong? It should have been backing purchasing power of those who were struggling. They were struggling with high EMIs, high fuel prices. They did not have jobs. You had to create jobs. Now, think about it logically, Neelu. If you have people with jobs, They get an income, they will save some, and they will spend the other. That's, if you don't have jobs, there is no spending power. And therefore, there has been demand which has been suppressed. And
No, but
which brings
why
me,
is government now making such a hollow sound and fury about this 12.7 12.75 lakh the exemptions which they have given in this income tax? What are they trying to achieve by misleading the people in a way, as you've just explained?
well, let me tell you, I mean, just think about it, that today, if you look at the middle class, their primary problem is not the exemption. Their principal worry is jobs. And remember, when the job market is sluggish, employers are able to talk down to the employees. I'll give you an example. You think you think Mr. Narayan Murthy, an extremely esteemed gentleman from the software industry, who talked about 70 hours a week. You had the L&T chairman who talked about 90 hours a week. Absolutely absurd and preposterous statements. They were able to say it because they know that people don't have a choice. Neelu, go back to the death of that very innocent girl who worked with a management consulting company. She burnt out under stress. And people were made to do that because the employer was having the, what you call as the bargaining advantage. So you have a situation today where if the job market is going to be sluggish, you will find that the ability of an employee to negotiate a wage hike diminishes. Also, whatever gains some people will have, it will be completely neutralized by the high level of inflation.
No, but
So
what I don't understand, Sanjay, I'm sure what you have explained, government does realize all of this. Nirmala Sitharaman does realize all this, but then they don't have the bandwidth or they don't have the will to correct the economic wrongs which they have committed. What I don't understand is that remember what happened during the UPA years when there was a slowdown and everybody started blaming Manmohan Singh. Then people run for the government scalp when there is an economic crisis like this. But the present government doesn't seem to be moved at all. They think of you, they will try and bring some lollipop or the other to mislead the people. So do you see the government which cannot handle because the ailment has reached such a drastic level?
can I tell you very honestly, I'm not a cynic by nature. I tend to believe people at face value until you do a deeper scrutiny. If you look at this government, I think this budget announcement is clearly targeted to the Delhi election because Delhi is basically the capital city of India. It's got a large bureaucrat population. A lot of people are from outside who are making their career and therefore are rising up that aspiration curve. I'll tell you the reason why. Go back, Neelu, to that very big announcement made by Nirmala Sitharaman in the last budget. She talked about an employment guarantee scheme, which was basically a cut and paste job from the Congress manifesto, actually, and
Yes.
said we'll have five different schemes. 500 top companies will be engaged in an apprenticeship scheme, and there will be a subsidy given, etc., etc. Can I ask you, where is that? Did she make a mention of that in the budget? And this is the
Right.
finance minister of India who
Hmm.
talked about an outlay of 2 lakh crore. So how can you take their statement that 1 lakh crore will be available in the investment market and that will result in a boom in demand? I mean, they treat the Indian consumer or the Indian viewer or the Indian people as, I think, with a great deal of contempt.
No,
If
but
this was,
was Nirmala Sitharaman trying to manage a headline by that 12.7 lakh the exemption given up to that amount? Was it just a headline management thing, which again now it seems has backfired?
it's completely backfired, and I'll tell you, you will see it over a period of a year. But I want to tell you what this was an attempt at. See, the BJP is now become a professional advertising and marketing party that just wants to give you a slug, a headline, a banner, anything to keep the people completely diverted, which is easy for them to do because they control all the TV channels. You should see the kind of conversations that happen at 9 o'clock on TV, where all the anchors are perhaps doing a better job than the BJP spokespersons are. right? So that helps them create a narrative. Number one. Number two, look at how social media trends, etc., happen. Why has Nirmala Sitharaman done this? One, the Delhi election. Secondly, because there was a larger perception that the middle class is getting angry with them because they're going nowhere. The middle class is generally disillusioned with every political party. They believe they pay taxes. They are very unhappy when the farmers and the poor get something because they believe they are contributing to them while they are at the receiving end. Under Mr. Modi, I do believe that the middle class has been truncated from the mainstream story. So they had to create some sop or the other. But I'll tell you the reason why Nirmala Sitharaman and the BJP have done what they have. Go back to the economic survey written by the chief economic advisor, which was talked about just a day earlier. It said some very significant things that, frankly speaking, were stunning revelations coming from somebody who was advising the government. It was very transparent. What did he say? Mr. Nageshwaran said that the government must get out of the way. And when you asked me what is structural, that is seriously structural. You can use a monetary and a fiscal policy to increase demand, increase investment. You can talk about interest rate hikes and, kind of rises and downs. But at a fundamental level, can we deny that this whole, what we have been talking about, this trifecta of ED, CBI, and income tax has frightened industry? Think about it, Neelu. If you and I were business people, I am, and let's assuming you are starting a venture, and you are paranoid about somebody knocking at your door because you see, it takes nothing for an ED, income tax, or a CBI to even concoct and manufacture a case and harass you. No civilized, honest, decent businessman wants to face his family or his friends or his shareholders with some kind of a case where they are interrogated. You think anybody will invest in that environment? No. That is a structural problem. Let me give you another example. The world is aware, Mr. Modi and his government can pretend that Mr. Adani is, kind of takes a bath in pure milk, but there are serious allegations against that group. The world and the corporate sector is seeing how the market regulator, SEBI, is so compromised. Can you have the confidence to believe that the regulator can't come after you tomorrow if they want to conduct a political vendetta? Thirdly, if today you were doing a venture, say a greenfield venture in energy or in transport or in media or entertainment, or you started a hotel or you were in real estate, you would worry if a Mr. Ambani or a Mr. Adani or a Mr. Mahindra or the Tata group got into that same space or they started competing with you. Because the big fish in this country is very close to this government. And if the big fish is very close to this government, you'll be worried that Mr. Modi's government will play favorites and your business may be bought out. Or you'll be told, kindly surrender your market share to the big brother in town. So I think I honestly feel that the non-crony capitalist industrialist in India or the businessman in India, the people who are really the bulk of this country, you, the bulk of this country is not Sensex. The bulk of this country is the millions of entrepreneurs, MSME, the
Right.
mid-sized businesses, the small-sized businesses, micro, etc., who are really contributing to growth and employment. They are at the receiving end of growth, which is why you're finding there's a structural flaw. This government hasn't understood that. And one last example, after all the hype on Make in India, the share of manufacturing in India's GDP has only gone down. How are you going to run this country? Agriculture, which has is getting more people working there. Instead of people moving away from agriculture, there has been a reverse migration post pandemic. Now, Nirmala Sitharaman and her team they are aware of all this. I mean, nothing that I'm saying is not in the public domain, but clearly in this budget, there's one other problem. And I'm sorry, I'm getting a little carried away because this is a very passionate subject to me. that she's so obsessed with this fiscal deficit. Well, I think this government wants to please all the analysts and the big investment bankers abroad and all these, think tanks that want to see fiscal deficit squeezed. She actually had an elbow room to increase expenditure, and she hasn't done that. And today, I'm telling you this, and I'm saying so, and we can chat about it 6 months down the line. Whatever money allegedly being saved, which will be spent, and that will result in India becoming the next big story in the global space, but that money is being taken away from government expenditure. So, net net, are you really creating more, shall we say, dynamism in the economy that you need to boost investment? I'm sorry, but I'm extremely skeptical. And this comes from a man who, by nature, even if I'm critical of this government, I would not argue too much on numbers. But I definitely see there are many fault lines.
You've pointed out the structural flaws. You've pointed out where the government has gone wrong as far as its policies are concerned. Now I'm coming to the most crucial question, and that is the trade war which is imposed by Donald Trump. We have a weakening rupee. We have structural flaws. We don't have a policy to deal with jobs, with manufacturing, with production. Rahul Gandhi also pointed that out today when he was speaking replying during the motion of thanks to the president's address. And he did point out all these things. And now to top it up, Donald Trump's trade war, which has been imposed, what is going to be the compounding effect of both these things? A lack of structural policies and plus a weakening rupee. And then you have this trade war because of the
Well, I can
tariffs.
tell you that Donald Trump is disrupting the global economy because he's following America first. Now, what is America first? America first is a wake up call to people in India who were very happily carried away by this Atmanirbhar narrative. Anyone who understands economics will tell you that, you may not like globalization, but ladies and gentlemen, we live in an interconnected world. Think about it. Today, if Donald Trump imposes tariff on Indian goods being exported there, Indian exports are already struggling. Where will you go? Because a big chunk of your export earnings come from the US market. And if they decline, your FX earnings or foreign exchange earnings come down, which means your dollar rupee will worsen. You are dependent hugely on crude oil imports being coming from abroad, which you have to pay in dollars, which will then be more dollars that you'll have to pay, which means you are going to import more inflation into the country, which means that tomorrow a manufacturer or an exporter who needs import component will have to buy and pay more in dollars, which means his export becomes more uncompetitive. You are in a downward spiral. And the principal reason behind this is the fact that I think Donald Trump is convinced that America must bear a brunt of the pain. Now, people I'm sure are telling him that this will result in higher cost for the American consumers. That end of day, if you are going to put these tariffs and people import in America despite the tariff, it'll create inflation in America. If it creates inflation in America, America will have to increase interest rates to stop the inflation from rising. If American interest rates rise on the dollar, then the dollar becomes a more attractive instrument for investment, which means emerging markets like India will see a further flight of capital going into New York. What are you going to do, ladies and gentlemen? I am concerned with the way the lack of transparency there is in this country, that you will never know what hits you until it hits you. Now, this government never likes to tell you the bad news. Have you read the recent reports pre budget? According to them, there is no poverty in this country. Everyone is fully employed. In fact, if you criticize them, they will tell you, ये तो देशभक्त नहीं, ये तो देशद्रोही है. I mean, we've reached an absolutely ridiculous level. It's so laughable. And I'm surprised how educated people, the CEOs of India Inc. have sold their soul. Nobody even questions this government. I mean, anyone watching your program, you and I are probably, standing out as oddballs who are having a chat critical of this government. Because if you look at everyone, they will be like, Gung ho. Mr. Modi is already campaigning in Delhi saying this is the greatest budget for the middle class. And this after he gave all the benefits to the big corporate groups, after all the tax benefits given to the corporate sector who have not invested that money. One of the reasons why the stock market boomed is because they took the tax bonanza that Nirmala Sitaraman and Mr. Modi gave them. They sat happily on their profits. They have sat happily on lower tax cuts. Their earnings have been high. They're sitting on excess capacity, by the way, 70 to 75%, and they're seeing their stock market boom. Why would they invest? You think,
Absolutely.
let me tell you, in a free market capitalist world, no one is going to invest out of charity. I've heard Mr. Modi worried. He should be. I've heard Nirmala Sitaraman anxious. She ought to be, saying that why isn't the private sector investing? Well, you have not created an environment. You thought by giving a tax cut, you'll create a confidence in them to go out and make a difference to the Indian economy. They will not, because they're all fearful. There is no demand and there is no incentive to invest more. And the market, which is exports, well, they have not been able to compete. One, principally, because I think end of day, global markets have also been a little uncertain. That is one part I'm willing to concede.
Right. But Sanjay, now the scariest question is that what happens with a weakening rupee and, almost like a recession like situation, which we are going to see globally because of the trade war imposed by Donald Trump. What do you think is going to be the immediate effect you preempt in India in terms of joblessness, in terms of price rise? And will India be also heading towards a recession like a recession like situation?
Well, just take the example of Canada and Mexico, for example. They are facing a 25% tariff. If you look at the exposure, for example, of Canada to America, the early forecast are they were going to see a massive hit on the GDP, could be as high as 2%. Mexico, by the way, is going to feel a similar impact. If you look at the amount of auto component parts that they export to America, they will get more expensive. America, by the way, will find cars getting more expensive. And therefore, they will be struggling to sell cars because their inflation will rise. So you're going to see a definite, perceptible, and actual slowdown. Now, if big markets slow down, that means your exports are not just going to be volatile, they're going to see a definite diminution. Now, please note one thing, Neelu. When you look at a GDP growth, it has exports as a very critical component, domestic demand, private investment, and government expenditure. Over the last couple of years, post pandemic in particular, government expenditure was being used as an instrument to crowd in private investment, which did not happen. Now, government expenditure, when you see highways, for example, or you see a port, or you see an airport being constructed, nowadays they need capital intensive technology. They use robots, they use heavy duty machinery. They don't need the thousands of people that we used to see in the time of Purab or Paschim and the 70s. They don't need those people anymore. It's all become very savvy, and they have got very complex machines that work at a different level. So you're going to see exports struggling, private investment, assuming this 1 lakh crore is spent by the middle class. You think it'll be spent in the first month? It'll be a huge time lag, over a year. Maybe some FMCG sales may go up at most. Now, government expenditure, they're already cutting it down in this budget. What does it leave you with? Practically nothing when you can bank on growth, excepting, as Mr. Modi said, Goddess Lakshmi. So I think this government has, frankly speaking, in my opinion, given up. There will be a hype, there'll be a headline, they will have some stock market operators keeping the markets going for a while. I am worried about retail investors, to be very frank with you. But the people who are going to be happy are these big crony capitalists. So they are capturing the Indian economy. And the chief economic advisor said, you need to build trust deficit. Has to be removed. You need to remove trust deficit, sorry. Because that trust deficit is between the government and the manufacturing companies and between those who are creating wealth. There is a complete, shall we say, the culture of you're guilty until you're proven innocent. That is exactly the culture that has destroyed the confidence of Indian entrepreneurs. And until this government gets out of the way, it is not centralized, micromanaging, micro targeting people. It's not making a list. You know, that famous list of the BJP, go after this guy, extort money. Remember the electoral bond scam? Quid pro quo is happening in broad daylight. I have a feeling India suffers from actually maximum government and minimum governance. Mr. Modi and the BJP have let India down.
But one last question before Sanjay, I wind up. That with this trade war now, do you think that Modi government, which has been talking big, and Prime Minister himself has spoken so highly about his policies and the way he has, led the country in all possible ways, do you think that the Modi government now has the gumption or the courage to stand up to Donald Trump and say that, look, if you can make America great, I want to make India great? Do you think that he has the courage and the audacity to tell Donald Trump on his face?
Nilu, the answer is no. Already, from what I've read, the duties on Harley Davidson motorbikes have been reduced without even being asked. I think India has, under Mr. Modi, tied itself far too much in an inextricable intertwining with the United States. And by allowing yourself to become susceptible to American pressure, I think India has done itself no good at all. And I think Mr. Modi and his government needs to own up to the people of India that after demonetization and the sloppy execution of GST and the terrible handling of the migration during COVID, they took India down. Please remember, and I want to conclude by telling you and your viewers that pre-pandemic, India's GDP growth was 4%. It was already down before the pandemic struck. Look at post-pandemic. You're probably grown by around 5%. You think a country where 800 million people are dependent on free food grains to survive can survive on a 5% GDP growth rate? America at 2.7 or 2.9% growth rate adds almost 25% of India's GDP every year. China will is adding close to $1 trillion to its GDP, even when it grows at 4.5%. So you have a problem. India needs a minimum of 8 to 9% GDP growth rate, and it's not happening because Mr. Modi's government is focused primarily on a lot of hype, a lot of great announcements. But I want to tell you this in the end. I think this is very important to share. Nilu, if you look at the history of countries, a society that is in turmoil or is divided or fractured can never get good economic growth on a sustained basis. You'll get 1 year of good growth, but when the attention of his leaders is focused on politics of Hindutva, etc., you don't have the energy left to create the animal spirits. So let me conclude by making that very emphatic statement that if you want social harmony in the country, that's the only prerequisite that you need for good economic growth. Then you need other economic policies. But if in the country you're going to have a divided political society and you're going to create this imbalance between the rich and the poor, then you will get a very low economic growth. And India is now facing that reality.
It's always a pleasure, Sanjay, to have you, and especially on a day when we are talking about a weakening rupee, the trade war imposed by Donald Trump. It was wonderful to listen to you, but definitely trying times before the country and before the world. I don't know how Modi government is going to tackle, but surely it's going to be like a trial by fire as far as India's economy is concerned. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for joining on HW. Thank you.
Thank you very much.